Hello, my awesome scientist. So tonight we are going to be talking about the water cycle. Make sure you have your journal and make sure you are turned to page 95. Make sure you are listening so you are ready for your little what did you learn when you come in. You need to follow along with the PowerPoint. You're going to fill in your vocabulary word here for each slide, and then if there's a blank in the definitions, you will fill that in, and then you will create your own little illustration for each water cycle vocabulary word. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so the water cycle. Okay, you guys are very familiar with the water cycle. It is a never-ending cycle. It's going to change water into vapor. It's going to condense it, form a cloud, and then it's going to send it back to the earth, to the ground. And it is a cycle, so it never ends. It goes on and on and on. Water is constantly being recycled around our earth, and it is very, very important to us that the water cycle happens and continues to cycle that water. So make sure that you understand each step of the water cycle as we are going through it. Okay, so we need to start with the most important thing, and that is the sun. The sun, he's like the boss of the water cycle. He is the ultimate source of energy for the water cycle. He powers it, he drives it. Okay, he's what gets the whole thing going. And if we didn't have the sun, we most likely wouldn't have the water cycle. So you need to remember that the sun is the source of the energy or the power that drives the entire water cycle. The sun directly starts this step of the water cycle called evaporation. You guys are very familiar with evaporation. That's when water turns from a liquid into a gas. Okay, it's caused by heat energy from the sun, and this causes the water vapor to rise up into the atmosphere. Okay, so that's this step right here. Okay, now they didn't picture the sun, but the sun, it's heating the water, and the water is evaporating up into the sky. Okay, now make sure you understand, evaporation is not forming a cloud. Evaporation just brings the water vapor up into the atmosphere. Okay, so the sun heats up the water, brings the vapor up to the sky, and here's the step where the clouds are formed. Okay, condensation. Remember, condensation, when we turn from a gas, it gets cooled down and it turns back into a liquid. I would make sure you pay attention to this step for when you come into class tomorrow. Condensation is the step that a lot of students get mixed up with. Okay, condensation is when the water vapor in the air, it gets cooled down and turns back into a liquid, and it forms a big puffy cloud. Okay, and you can remember it by condensation, cooled down, clouds. C. Okay, condensation is when the vapor gets cooled down and it forms a cloud. C. Okay, now eventually that cloud is going to get really full. Okay, and the fuller it gets, it can't hold all of that water that's in that cloud. That's when it's going to fall down from the sky as precipitation. So precipitation is our fancy word for rain, snow, sleet, or hail. Okay, precipitation is when water falls from the sky in the form of a liquid or a solid, depending on the temperature and the atmosphere conditions. And we're very familiar with precipitation. That's when it falls from the sky. Okay, the next step we want to talk about is transpiration. This is probably a new step for most of you. It's basically the same thing as evaporation, except it's happening off of plants and trees and grass. Okay, transpiration is the process of water evaporating from a plant and returning to the air as vapor. So same thing, the sun heats up the water, but it's heating up the water that's in all these plants right here. It heats up the water that's in the plants, and then it's going to change it into a gas, and that water vapor is going to rise. Okay, so transpiration is simply evaporation happening off of plants. Okay, so surface runoff. So after that water comes down, after it's been precipitated, it has to go somewhere, right? So surface runoff is simply when the water has come down from the sky, it's precipitated, and it's flowing around the earth, okay? It's the flow of water over the earth's surface once the ground has been saturated with rain. So here you can see it right here, okay? It's precipitating, and then the water is just running off the surface of the earth. Okay, so that's runoff right here. When the water runs off of the earth, it flows across the land. Okay, now this one, you want to write both of these words down. Okay, so it's called collection. Sometimes it's called accumulation. So after that water has fallen back to the earth, it runs off, and then some of it collects. And it's going to collect in a pond or a lake or in an ocean. Okay, so after that water has run off the surface, it collects back in the lakes and the oceans. That's called collection or accumulating. Collection is when you put something somewhere. So, like if you collect baseball cards, you collect all your baseball cards, you put them back in a binder, okay? If you collect shells, you pick them up from the beach and then you put them in your little jar. Okay, so collection is when all that water comes back to the oceans or the lakes. Remember, it's also called accumulation. Then the last step we're going to talk about is percolation. It's kind of a fancy word. Percolation is just the movement of water through the soil and its layers by gravity pulling it down. Some of it doesn't go into the lake. Some of it doesn't go into the ocean. Some of it, when it rains, it goes into the soil. It goes into the ground as groundwater. That is called percolation. When it goes into the ground, because gravity's pulling it down through the layers of the soil. Okay, so those are the steps of the water cycle. Most of them you're familiar with. You want to make sure that you understand the whole process. Basic review is the sun is the ultimate source of energy. It heats up the water. It goes up as evaporation. It forms a cloud as condensation. It falls down as precipitation. It will then run off of the surface of the earth. It can collect back into lakes and into oceans. If it doesn't collect in lakes and oceans, then it's going to get percolated down into the soil or the ground from gravity pulling it down. Water can also evaporate off of plants like trees and grass. And when the sun heats up the water stored in the plants and the trees, it's going to evaporate it back up to the clouds. It can start the whole water cycle again. Remember, it's a never-ending cycle. I would remember for tomorrow, condensation, like we talked about. I would also remember that it goes up as evaporation, forms a cloud as condensation, and falls down as precipitation. If you remember that, you will be good to go for tomorrow. Make sure you have your illustrations done, and we will have some fun with the water cycle tomorrow. I will see you